Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys checking out today's video and hanging out with me for a little bit. And guys, today I want to touch upon a topic that we allude to quite a bit here on the channel, or I have over the last 2 or 3 years, and that is how bass fishing is becoming a rich man's sport. And this really bothers me a lot. It disturbs me a lot. I don't think it's one of those things that you can't like talk about at one time and just sweep it under the carpet, because this is fundamentally transforming our sport into something that is not good. And I want to get into this today a little bit and sort of trace back a little bit and talk about how we've got to this point and how we can correct it, how it can be fixed. Because if you're like me and you love bass fishing, you started out and didn't have any money, and then you're faced with the reality we find ourselves in today's world, it can be very disheartening. So we're going to have that discussion today, and curious to get your guys' feedback in that as well. Also, guys, before we get started, just thank you everybody out there that's taking time to support Intuitive Angling. If you like the content, man, all you guys that have just subscribed to the channel, free and easy to do so. Everybody that's been using all the links I put in the description, you guys are the reason that these videos are on YouTube. And without that support, you know, we wouldn't have a channel here. So thank you very much for your support of Intuitive Angling. A big thank you for me and my family on that. Okay, this is a sensitive topic to me, man, because I've seen what's happened ever since I've been fishing. And let me sort of go back a little bit and sort of talk about how in 2025, effectively, bass fishing, especially tournament fishing, has become a rich man's sport. Not that you have to have a lot of money to go bass fishing, you don't, but there's been a transformation in the sport as a whole towards, you know, it getting more and more expensive with no brakes on it. And I want to talk a little bit about how that's happened here. Now, one of the things that I have noticed a big difference is, you know, when I started bass fishing back, you know, in the late 70s, when I was in high school, everybody that started out bass fishing, and even people that had been in it for a while, if you looked at their equipment, nobody really had good equipment. It's like most people had junky boats. I didn't know anybody that had a new bass boat. Most people had old pickup trucks to tow them with. Most people had 4 or 5 rod and reels, and that was it. And that was sort of the norm. That's just what everybody had. It's like if somebody got a new bass boat and they showed up at a buddy tournament down at Grand Lake or some benefit tournament at Table Rock, it stood out because most people down there had boats that were, you know, 5 or 10 years old. And, you know, including me. I had a 16-foot leaking flat bottom with a 1967 9-horse tiller stir on it with a 12-boat trolling motor. That was my bass boat, one depth finder, up front a flasher. So this was sort of had been the norm for a long time. And then one of the things that I noticed, you know, when I started traveling fishing tournaments, the common thread back then for most people like myself is that we'd say we had a tournament at Kentucky Lake or something, and I had to drive 300 or 400 miles for the tournament. Or when I first started fishing the Bassmaster Invitationals, we'd get together with 3 or 4 guys and we'd find the cheapest motel we could find, like something that was like $25 a night, and we'd all chip in and we'd bring our sleeping bags and we'd have 4 or 5 guys on the floor, a couple of guys in the bed. That's how you did it. And guys, you don't see that anymore. It's like guys that are in their 20s now, they roll into these tournaments with a $100,000 bass boat and 5 cheater boxes on the front and a brand new Ford F-250 diesel 3/4 ton pickup, staying at the Hampton Inn, something like that. You don't ever, I'm talking never in 2025 see guys staying at some, you know, little roach motel like everybody used to back in the 80s. That's just the way it was. And it wasn't, you know, it didn't have anything to do with the economy whatsoever. It had to do with the fact that most bass anglers came from very modest means. Bass angling at that point was not an elitist sport like it is right now. And what you've had, there's been a huge transformation that it really started, guys, when they changed the rule on horsepower. They changed it from 150 horsepower to 250 horsepower. Bassmaster did back in, God, I think it was the late 90s. They made that switch over there. Late 90s or early 2000s, something like. When was that? I'm trying to think the last 150 that I had. Somewhere around the late 90s, you know, they changed the rule. And back then, bass boats, you know, the standard bass boat length was about 17.5 foot long with a 150 horse outboard motor on it. and that kept the cost fairly stable for like a decade. But what happened, as soon as you got this horsepower rule changed, where they went to 250s, and then they started going up to 20 and 21 foot boats, the cost of bass boats went through the roof. I mean, they basically doubled when that happened. And I remember when that transformation took place, because I had, through Ranger, I had what was called a memo bill, where Ranger let me use a boat for a year, no charge, and at the end of the year, I had to sell it and give them the money back for it. And I remember that first year that it went to 250, I said, there's no way I'm going to be able to sell this thing. Nobody's going to want to pay this kind of money for a used bass boat. And that was the beginning of it. And then it's like there was a 6% increase in bass boats like every single year. They got more and more and more expensive, to the point now where it's just out of control, where the average fully rigged new bass boat now is $100,000 or more. So I blame a lot of that, as far as, how it's a rich man's sport, on that rule change that Bassmaster made back in the late 90s. I've always said this, guys, I don't quite understand why in tournament fishing, why there can't be sort of a precedent. Like, why in 1995 could Bassmaster not said, in considering the fact that we do not want to turn this sport into some elitist activity, we're going to have equipment limitations where, we're going to stay with 150 horsepower outboard, 17.5 foot boat. You're allowed one depth finder up front, you're allowed one in the back, and at least you're going to have some level of consistency as far as a level playing field. And now we don't have anything with that. And that's one of the biggest things that we have seen, is this skyrocketing cost of bass boats in correlation with what we've really seen over the past, 2 or 3 years with the cheater box. Now, prior to this, I remember, guys, back in, I believe it or not, guys, me being Anitech, I was sponsored by 2 different electronic companies. I was sponsored by Lowrance back in the back in the late 90s, and I was sponsored by a company called Micronar that made flashers, back in the early 1990s. And back then, when you had the standard setup on a bass boat was one flasher up front and one flasher on the console. And most of the time back then, these flashers were like $150 a piece. So back in the 1990s, if you had to go purchase your electronic setup for your bass boat, and I'm talking about a state-of-the-art bass boat, you could do it for less than $500. You'd have both units for less than $500. And now you're talking about, it's unlimited. I mean, some of these dudes they've got over $50,000 worth of electronics on their boats. And again, that goes back to the tournament organizations not putting brakes on equipment limitations that has turned this into a rich man's sport. So if you want to blame somebody for the elitism that we're experiencing now in bass fishing, look to the bass fishing tournament organizations for not putting brakes on equipment limitations. That's a big part of it. So what's happened, this is sort of the transition that really, really disturbs me a lot, is we've seen, since the equipment's getting more expensive, and since the entry fees are getting more expensive, and since everything else is getting more expensive that go along with that, you're slowly weeding out the guys like myself that were able to make it back in the 80s that didn't have any money. And now every year and every year and every year, the people that get into the sport have got more money. They've got family money, they've got businesses. I hear it all the time, guys. It's one of the two. It's like, if you see some dude out there that doesn't have hardly any notoriety and that hasn't had any success in fishing, but they roll in there with a $200,000 plus rig and they're at every tournament, I can guarantee you got either family money or they own their own businesses. So when I talk about is it become a rich man's sport, the days of somebody like myself that just worked bussing tables or mowing lawns or working a part-time job and having, just crappy equipment to be able to get out and fish competitively, those days are gone. You can't do it anymore. And therefore, the structure that we've seen as far as the overall increase in everything about fishing is more and more every single year. It's pushing the guys out the window that simply don't have financial safety nets. Now, the only exception to that, guys, is occasionally if you're some dude out there that, you know, doesn't have any family, you don't have any girlfriend, you still live in your mom and dad's basement, you live and eat and breathe fish, you don't buy clothes, you don't do anything, every single penny goes into bass fishing, and you're fairly good at bass fishing, you know, and you can make some money, you might be able to squeak by, especially if you got a few sponsorships. But that is an exception to the rule. That is a fraction. That's a 1% type of a fraction within the overall population. And effectively, we have gotten to the point in 2025 where you can just say it, bass fishing is elitist sport. I'm not saying that you've got to have money to go out. You can still get a cheap boat and you can still go fishing and it doesn't cost much, but it's not the same. The dream of somebody that wants to be competitive in fishing it no longer exists, because number one, the fact that you need to have skill to compete in bass tournaments no longer exists with technology. Technology has done two things. Electronic technology, it's enabled people that have a lot of money to excel in the sport, and it's enabled people that don't have a lot of experience in the sport to excel. So overall, the skill level in fishing has deteriorated, and it continues to deteriorate because of that. And that's for another topic I don't want to get into. But ultimately, guys, it's not good. It's not going in the right direction. Anytime that you have money influencing a sport like bass fishing, it degrades the sport. And guys, I'm getting so sick of money, guys. I am so sick of the influence that money has on our society today. And you don't have to look any further than politics. I have never seen in my entire life the influence that the billionaire class is having over our politics in our country right now. It's like they set the agenda, they bend people's arms, they put people in positions of power, they set agenda, they set the legislative process. It's absolutely disgusting. And you know, we get to this point because we allow people to take advantage of us like that, whether it be in politics or in bass fishing. So the only thing that you can do in bass fishing is for people not to participate. You know, if you said, okay, we're not going to participate in these tournaments until the entry fees drop in half, and that, you know, you take away these dudes out there that have these $150,000 bass boats out there versus some dude that has a $10,000 bass boat, and level the playing field. And right now, we have the most unlevel playing field across the board in bass fishing that I've ever seen. It's not so much on the upper level circuits, because like I said, the upper level circuits have weeded out the people that don't have much money. And another reason this takes place, let me give you one other thing, is that I don't care how good you are as a bass angler, you're going to have a dry spell. Unless you're somebody like Jacob Wheeler, who's like a freak of nature and is just in a different universe talent-wise, 99.9% of the bass fishermen out there are going to run through dry spells. And if you are living on the edge financially, where it's like every tournament's a struggle to get to, you can't afford to have a dry spell because you're done. But the guys out there that have financial safety nets, they can have all the dry spells they want. I'll tell you one story. I'm not going to name the person, guys, but this is one of the most famous bass anglers in the history of the sport. I'm going to tell you about this. When he came from a very wealthy family, and basically his family told him when he was wanting to be a pro, like so many guys do when they're 19 or 20 or 21 years old, they have this dream of being a pro fisherman, but they got this big financial, obstacle in front of them. His parents told him, "You do not worry about money. You buy anything you want. Here's credit cards. Go fishing anytime. Buy anything you want. If you have a bad season, don't worry about it. You'll be back next year. Don't worry about money. Money is a non-issue whatsoever." Now imagine this, guys. You're a 20-year-old kid, and you want to be a professional bass fisherman. And your parents have told you that money is a non-issue. So you right off the bat, you have eliminated the number one distraction that most bass anglers at least used to have. Everybody that I know, the number one thing on your mind when you woke up in the morning and you put that boat into gear and you went to your first spot in the morning, your number one focus was, am I going to be able to afford this? What am I going to do if I don't make a check here? Can I get to the next tournament? That's in your mind constantly. 24/7 that's in your mind. Imagine for a second if that was gone from your thinking. Imagine that you did not have to worry about that, and the only thing that you had to worry about was finding those fish and putting those fish in the boat, because you knew it doesn't matter if you zero or you catch 20 pounds, you're going to be back next year. And that example of what I gave you, that when this happened years ago, the story I'm telling you about, that is more commonplace now. And that is what we've seen. It's like people do not have these financial distractions. The minority of people that are excelling and staying in the sport, and therefore we're having this huge transformation, this huge wealth transfer in professional bass fishing and tournament fishing in general, that's pushing out the guys like myself or guys that don't have much money. And guys, there's a ton of people out there that would give their left nut to be able to fish competitively, but they simply can't afford it. They got families to take care of. You know, they make an average income. They don't have any discretionary income. So it doesn't matter how much talent they got or how good they are, they're not going to be able to do it because they cannot afford to take that risk. And this is the thing that sucks about tournament bass fishing, is any other sport out there, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, whatever, you don't have to have money to compete in that. You don't. It's like, if you want to be a football player, it doesn't cost, there's not a $5,000 entry fee per game, and you don't have to have a $200,000 rig to roll in and play football. And bass fishing is the only sport that we have that, and it's a direct result of the tournament organizations in correlation with the industry people trying to increase profit margins, because anytime you have more equipment, anytime a piece of equipment is more expensive, it has a bigger profit margin behind it. And therefore, let me tell you one story, guys. This is actually one that I went to with Ranger Boats years ago. This was back like 30 years ago. When I saw this happening, you know, the everybody going to 250 and 21-foot boats, I went to Ranger and I said, look, and none of these people are even at Ranger anymore. This was 30 years ago. I saw the writing on the wall, and I said, let me help you guys design a bass boat that is going to reduce the cost. It's going to have a maximum of 150 horsepower motor on it. It's going to basically be half the cost of your current boats that you have right now. It's going to allow more people to fish. It's going to set a baseline where we don't have this ever accelerating race to get more and more expensive boats out there. And they basically laughed at me and said, Randy, we can't make any money doing that. It's like, yeah, it's a good idea, but we can't make enough money if we don't sell these super, super expensive boats. And it was sort of like somebody finding out that, you know, about Santa Claus or something. It's like, so that's the way it is. It's all about money. It's not about the bigger picture. It's not about doing what's right. It's not about having a fair playing field. It's not about the bigger picture. It's about money. And all in this video one more time, and I'm going to say it over. You're going to hear me say this a lot over the next year. Money corrupts everything, guys. Money corrupts everything. You look at any aspect of our society right now and you follow the money. None more evident than in politics in 2025. Money corrupts everything. So anyway, guys, just a few thoughts. Let me know what y'all think about it. We'll talk later.